So when an organization is doing an agile transformation, what they're doing is they're moving from waterfall to agile.
What is waterfall?
Waterfall is the traditional way in which projects are ran.
Okay.
Just project management, right?
Okay.
So that they're saying we're no longer wanting to do just the traditional project management. We're wanting to go agile. Now, I've been through several transformations and assisted in a lot of transformations, and the main issue that you see over and over again is buy-in.
Buy-in meaning that?
Buy-in from the organization. That can be your leadership, that can be the person who's doing the job, that could be your scrum master, that could be anybody. When you're transforming and you're moving from waterfall to agile, you're going to have a population of people in the organization who's going to believe, oh my God, this is not going to work.
So that's probably one of the biggest challenges that you come across.
And that is going to be your largest challenge.
So how do you, because again, I guess I'm not surprised that I'm hearing this. So how do you ultimately get them to where they all buy in?
The problem that I've seen mostly with the buy-in is that now that we're moving from waterfall to agile, how do I fit in what's my job? The way in which you bridge that gap and the way in which you fix the issue is to start to teach and to train individuals. You were doing your job this way. Now you do it this way. Before you would handle this document and turn in this document. Now, in order for us to get the updates that we need, they're system-based. So you have to be able to show people what they were doing before and how it translates into the new way of working. It's still the job. It's still the position. But you have to be able to provide that level of communication and detail to individuals for them to be able to understand my job is not gone. My job has changed. I can still do my job. I just need to be turned and pointed into the right direction to do it.
Okay. So let's say you've got a company, they've made the transformation from waterfall to agile, and they've got the buy-in, but let's just say they've implemented agile and for whatever reason something doesn't work, or maybe it's failing. What does that look like? How do you diagnose it, and then how do you fix it? And I guess ultimately, does that fall on you if you say, you know what, I make this transformation? Does that ultimately fall on you, or is that something that commonly happens when?
It can happen in organizations, and I've seen it happen.
Okay.
You know, organizations go through this transformation. A lot of times what has happened is that they've gone through the transformation, they think they're done, and they send you away. We don't need you anymore, Dionne, we've got this.
Okay.
Whereas what happens is you have it from a high level perspective, but you don't have it deeply rooted in the work. And what happens is that you'll start to see it in the metrics. You'll start to see it in the numbers, because there are numbers that are produced every 2 weeks. And if you don't really realize and look at the signs of the numbers and the data that's given to you, then you won't see it until it's too late.
So if they get rid of you, who oversees the project?
They normally are able to do it within the organization. So like, just say, for example, I'm coming in as a consultant into the organization to help you with this agile transformation. Once the transformation is done, and it's supposed to be BAU, business as usual, right? The new business as usual, then you can say, okay, we don't need the consultants anymore. We've got it. But what happens is that once the consultants go away, a lot of factors can actually be involved as well. So if you have people that leave and you bring in new people that may not be bought into this transformation, or people who may not really and truly still understand their role, that's going to show up in the metrics. And that's where you first dive in. And in some cases, you have companies where once you've done the transformation, they think they got it. They're going to march to their own orders. Then you have another set of another organization that will do something very similar. You know, we've got it. We've done the transformation. But in that case, they will come up with a center of excellence or a LACE, where it oversees the process.
What about situations? So what about with executives? How do you get buy-in from executives who are resistant to Agile or SAFe? Have you ever come across a situation like that?
Yeah, you do. Because at that leadership level, at that executive level, they are looking at dollar, right? How can I save money? How much is this costing me? They're looking at it from a different lens than a scrum master or a developer or a tester. Their eyes into the project is totally different. So from an executive level, before that agile transformation even takes place, they should be bought in. And what I mean by that is that they should know that this is what's appropriate and what's necessary and needed for the organization. Now, you will have executives that aren't bought totally in. They could have gotten outvoted or whatever the process was for them. But it's a matter of spending time with that executive and being able to get that executive to understand. Now, at the executive level, it's not the Scrum Master having these conversations. It's not the release train engineer having these questions. It's more your center of excellence, your LACE partners that are having that conversation with your executive.
Are there any sort of common breakdowns that you see across teams and departments?
Communication and resource allocation. Sometimes the communication is not clear across teams. And if that's not clear, then what's being delivered is not correct. Resources. There are times in which resources are shared across various teams. And if you really and truly are not managing that resources allocation toward each team that he or she is working on, you can overload that individual. Which means once you overload an individual, now what they're producing for you, whether it's coding or whether it's testing, whatever that may be, now you're running the quality of what they're delivering at risk.
Do you ever come across conflicts, like organizational conflicts, where one side is maybe blaming the other for something not necessarily?
That always happens.
That always happens.
And I say it always happens because if something blows up, I've seen them point fingers. Well, such and such, it was in their wheelhouse to do. That's part of the reason why PI planning is so important, because PI planning helps to drive that out. PI planning is program increment, and it's about a 12-week program. It's about a 12-week time span, depending upon your company. It may be longer, maybe shorter. But during that time period, what happens in PI planning, you bring everybody into a room or on a call that's going to have something to do with this work within these 12 weeks, or potentially have something to do with it. Now you have an opportunity to say, Jack, I need your team to help me between these dates. Can you help me? This is what I need from you. Dionne, I can't help you then, but I can help you, and they give you a different date. Let me see if I can work that out. That's the importance of having that PI planning and understanding what your role is, to be able to have those communications back and forth with those various teams so that you don't have the finger pointing at the end and things blow up in your face.
So what is your approach to managing high risk / high visibility initiatives?
When managing something that's high risk and especially high visibility, I rely upon data. I look at data on a regular basis. I communicate with just about everybody that's involved in that initiative on a regular basis. The other task that I take on during that time period is getting people to understand that if something's not going right and if something is off and you see some flag getting ready to be raised, let me know. Because the important way to get that communicated is to communicate it before it happens, not after it happens. So you have to get people on your team to trust you. And the trust comes by someone being able to say, hey, Dionne, John has gone AWOL and he is not doing what we're asking. Dionne comes in and has a conversation with John, not saying that Jill told on him, but basically coming in and saying, hey, John, this is what I'm saying. Can I have this? Right? We're saying that you're not working on the work in which needs to be performed. Can you give me what I need? When you're able to go back and build that type of relationship and people understand we're working on an initiative that's highly visible and it's got a ton of risk involved and we've got to execute really flawlessly, that everybody's in this together, but that she's got my back and she's not going to throw me under the bus and say she told it.
How do you handle projects where priorities constantly shift? You laugh. Wow.
Because that happens. Even when working let me give you an example. I was working as a Scrum Master and a release train engineer at this organization. And the priorities for one of the teams kept changing. And what I had to allow happen, I had to allow that iteration, that 2-week time period to fail. And because I allowed it to fail, I was able to come back and explain, because you can see it in the system, these were the priorities that we set at the beginning of the 2 weeks. These are the priorities or the items in which we finished at the end of the 2 weeks. Stevie Wonder could see that the priorities that you started out with and the priorities that you finished with were two totally different sets of priorities. Now I have the data. There are times in which I like to have the data in front of me before I go back and I really make a stink. Because saying it at the time, no one was really listening. That's why I needed the data. So I use data to support it.
What's your process for aligning stakeholders when everyone wants something different?
That's happened too. There's a stakeholder meeting as a release train engineer that I would have before we would go into these planning sessions. And what we would do, we would take everyone, and I'm talking about the leadership, their priority list. And they would provide it, and I would consolidate it into a spreadsheet. And what we would do is see if there were any priorities that were overlapping. And then we would look at the list to see, are there any priorities that compete with each other? Meaning that if we do A, will it eliminate N, right? And then from there, we would say, what are the goals of the organization over the next quarter? And then from there, the list would just fall in line as to what we would need to work on.
What is your approach to governance, reporting, and transparency at the executive level?
At the executive level, the reporting portion of it is given at the end of each sprint, really, from my experience. But the way in which it's communicated on a larger scale. So when you're working as a Scrum Master, you're dealing in stories, right? Those stories move up to epics. And then those epics really fall on your business objectives. When I communicate with an executive, I'm talking business objectives. But when I talk to the developer, I'm talking stories. And you have to be able to know who you're talking to be able to make sure you're communicating the right words. When I go to the executive and I'm talking business objectives, then they know if we're on target or not. They don't need to know if Jill came in and didn't do her. They don't need to know all that. They need to know, are we on target for these objectives, because that's dollars.
Can you describe a time when you've helped a large organization recover a project that was off track?
There's been a lot of projects that have been off track. There was one traditional project that I worked on, and we were less than 2 months from completing the project.
When you say traditional, what do you mean by traditional?
Waterfall.
Oh, okay.
Waterfall
Right,
project.
right. Okay.
It was a waterfall project. We were less than 2 months being done with the project, only to realize that we were not informed that a portion of the product that we were going to deliver had a dependency on another team that was not aware of the project that we were working on. So I had to work with the team to bring in those individuals to be able to help us finish the product, test it, and get it implemented in less than 2 months. Now, it took some additional work on my end because now I had to manage 2 different work streams. But it wasn't a problem because they were flexible enough because they knew the value of what we were getting ready to deliver from a product perspective and were able to help us. So it happens. It's not uncommon. As a project manager, as a scrum master, even as a leader, you just have to know how to settle down, how to look at how to resolve the problem within the time period that you have remaining, and then execute.
How do you identify root causes of missed deadlines and delivery failures?
I figured that out via the data. And the data that I use in my experience has been Jira. So I go back through Jira and be able to pull and extract reports. You can see within Jira the number of rework opportunities that were there. You see if work has been completed in the time frame that's been set, or if you had to extend it, or if you had to break it down, or if additional work was created beyond it. So I always go back to the data because my data helps support the story that I'm going to tell as to why a deadline was missed or why we're having issues and problems.
What do you do when a project is technically on track, but people are burned out?
That's happened as well. Whenever you're planning for work to be completed, and I'm going to go back to PI planning, in that time increment of that 12 weeks, if you are a good Scrum Master, what you've done before you've even walked into PI planning is you've talked to everybody that's on your team. You've identified what vacation time do you have scheduled, and is there a holiday included during this time period? And you ensure that that's integrated into PI planning. Now, you also communicate to your team, if you have not taken vacation, that is your time and your opportunity to take the vacation that you need, because part of your job as a servant leader is to ensure that there's not burnout.
So how would you describe your leadership philosophy?
My leadership philosophy is people first. I have found through my experience, if you take care of your people, they take care of you.
How do you coach leaders who struggle with control and delegation?
For someone who is a control type leader, I have found that once you start to manage up, they back away. So the same expectation that you're coming to me with, I flip it and put it back on you. And I found in my experience, leaders don't really want you to do them that way. So they kind of leave you alone. With a leader that is a micromanager or someone who just likes to hover, I normally answer your questions before you ask me. I give you a list of the things in which I'm working on. I give you a list of things that are priority. And then I let you know if there's any risk or dependencies out there. That has a tendency to back up someone who's like that.
I've heard you use this term an awful lot, and that is servant leadership. What is servant leadership?
Servant leadership is when you put people first and yourself last. When I first heard the term servant leadership, as I was going through getting my Scrum Master certification, I realized I've always been doing servant leadership. You know, I thought back to a gentleman that was on my team at one point that didn't come to work that morning. And his fiance reached out to me to let me know that that morning he was taking out the trash. And when he reached up to take and put the trash into the trash can, it was glass in the trash can, and cut his arm. Cut it really bad, to the point to where when she spoke with me, he was in surgery. But by the time that young man got out of surgery, I had flowers waiting for him, letting him know, we got your back. Take care of you. Do what you need to do. Everything else will be waiting for you when you get back. Don't worry about it. We got you.
It's funny you said that, because when I asked the question, I was just going to ask you, what does servant leadership look like in practice and not necessarily in theory? So while that might be more towards maybe a personal story and a personal that's not necessarily centered around Scrum, how would you, what does servant leadership look like within
the framework?
The framework of Agile.
Within the framework, it's the same way. I mean, it's just, it may not be the gentleman who, you know, had the accident, but it's more or less your tester needs you to help the developer move a little faster along to get the work done, right? So normally what happens is your developer is over there, he or she's coding. Once they're coding and they're done, it goes to the tester to validate. And I had this problem because they had a fight almost on site. But what I had to do was have a conversation with the developer and say, hey, we only got 10 days in this sprint. You can't code for 8 days and give it to the tester for 2 days to get done before the sprint is done. You know, let's put someone else into consideration as it relates to the work. How about you code for the first 5 days, give this person the last 5 days to test? Because if they have any issues or problems and you got to go back and recode, you've given them an opportunity to do so.
What does it mean to be a strategic Scrum Master instead of an administrative one?
Administrative, to me, you're checking the box and you're just kind of going by. Strategic, you're really and truly thinking about what they're telling you. So just say, for example, you have a daily stand-up or a daily sync where the team comes together. It's about 15 minutes. They go through and they talk about the various things in which they've done. The person that's checking the box is just making sure that everybody's name gets called. But the strategic Scrum Master is listening. Did John say that same thing for the past 3 days? Is he still testing? Is he having a problem with testing? That's the difference between the strategic Scrum Master and then the, what did you call
administrative
it?
one.
The administrative one.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you coach teams that are emotionally disengaged or resistant to change?
When you have a team that's emotionally stressed and disengaged, you normally have a team that's been overworked. So in that case, what I've done is I've spoken with each person on an individual basis and asked, what is your true bandwidth and capacity? Are you just working on this initiative, or are you having other initiatives that you're working on? Do you have people calling you on the back end asking you for something that's not assigned? Because that happens also. And if that's the case, then as your Scrum Master and as your servant leader, then I have the opportunity to step in and police that a little bit more for you than what's been transpiring, because you probably haven't told me.
So tell me, what's the most difficult organizational problem you've ever had to solve?
Let me think about that one. What's the most difficult
organizational problem you've ever had to solve?
Is this Scrum related or just leadership related or period?
Yes.
The most complicated issue from an organization perspective that I've had to resolve was to blend two different types of ways in which projects run. At one organization, the project was structured to where the front end of the project was waterfall and the back end of the project was agile. I would have to say that's the most complicated way in which I had to work for one project. But the beauty of that is that we ended up saving that organization roughly $25 million. In that project, what was done, the front end of it was waterfall because we were looking at a process of how each department ran. And we basically captured that, not in Visio, but via BlueWorks. And we were able to document the timing of how long it took to perform each task. Once that portion of the project was complete, because it went in phases, now we're able to look at those particular steps to see what can be automated and what can remain manual. The automation portion of that is what went over to Agile. And then we were able to create and complete the automation piece. And once you combine both, then that's when we were able to communicate the cost benefit and the savings.
What would you say is a common leadership mistake that quietly destroys project success?
Overloading the team, as well as not communicating the true dependencies and risk that are emerging. When you overload your people and you overload the team, you overload someone who's developing, which your code is going to blow up at the end. You're overloading your tester who hasn't tested everything as if he or she needed to, which is going to blow up your product at the end. And then if you're not calling out the risk and dependencies as you should, those very risk and dependencies are going to derail the whole initiative.
Let me ask, what's the first thing you assess when you enter an organization?
When I enter an organization, I identify. When I enter an organization, I identify exactly where they are in the process. Are we in the beginning stage? Are we in the middle? Or are we tailing off toward the end? Once I know exactly where we are within that project or within that initiative, now I know how to pivot. And now I know how to work. If it's in the beginning, I know that everything is brand new. And I know how to communicate across the organization what needs to transpire. If I come into an organization in the middle of an initiative, that's where the real work starts, because now I have to understand what's happened before me, what's remaining, and where we are.
Okay. How do you balance people challenges with process challenges?
It's your communication style. If you have 12 people on a team, you got 12 different ways to communicate. You can't communicate to everyone the same. So you have to learn the people that you're working with. Because I could easily say, hey, Bob, can you get this for me? And Bob knows exactly what I'm saying. But I may have to go to Susie and approach her totally different. Hey, Susie, how's your day? How's it going? How's the dog? Hey, you know what? Is it possible to get this, this, and this from you on this date? Two totally different ways of communicating, but still getting what I need.
How do you coach a team through conflict, misalignment, or dysfunction?
Whenever you're running and managing a project, there's always going to be a certain level of dysfunction, uncertainty, and confusion. It's just the nature of the business. There's never been a project that I've ran that has just been perfect from beginning to end. People in this particular type of industry understand that there's going to be a certain level of dysfunction, confusion, and uneasiness in all of it. But what I strive to tell the team to do is to communicate and let me know when you're approaching or you've reached your threshold. You know, one of the things in which, even as a Scrum Master, as an RTE, as a leader, what I've always informed people to do is leverage the time that you have off. Sometimes people forget to actually just take vacation days and take the time off. You need the time so that you can go back and reset and then come back in, because it's going to be there. You just have to control it and be able to have people to understand when they need their break and their time off.
So why do organizations struggle with scaling Agile?
Organizations will struggle when their teams work in silo, when they have poor coordination amongst teams across the organization, like multiple teams, and then when the culture resists. You know, when you have people that don't support or don't think that it's going to work, then the company is not going to be able to scale Agile at the rate in which they think.
What does strong PI planning look like versus weak PI planning?
Strong PI planning, which is the program increment planning, is when you go in and everyone is on board as to what work is going to be released or given at the end of that PI. A week program increment session more or less is when you're still trying to decide what you're working on, or when you're in the middle of PI planning and the way in which you're going to work or the features that you're going to work on at that period change. I've been in an organization where that's happened and it has just been a hot mess. I think that's the best way to say it.
What is the Scrum Master's role in PI planning, and why is it often misunderstood?
The role of a Scrum Master during PI planning is to help the team continue to plan. It's misunderstood because there are times in which a Scrum Master may assume that their role is to relax and let the team and the product owner organize all the work, when that's not the case. A lot of work is involved in PI planning. A lot of work is setting up the work that's going to take place iteration over iteration. But if the Scrum Master would really and truly realize that they must attend the sync meetings that occur during PI planning, they must speak to the way in which the team has organized work at the end of each day, then they would be okay. That's how a Scrum Master needs to plan whenever going into PI planning.
Okay. So how do you support release train engineers and program leadership?
As a Scrum Master, you support a release train engineer by providing whatever they're requesting of you. There are sync meetings that the release train engineer is going to have with each Scrum Master as you go through the entire PI, and just being truthful. Now, the product owner and program manager would also need to have a really good relationship with the release train engineer in order for the art to continue to move forward the way in which it needs to.
Okay. What are the biggest mistakes organizations make when implementing SAFe?
When implementing SAFe, the primary mistakes that they make is that everyone understands. Another mistake is that everyone is on board. And then the final mistake is not giving enough time for the transition to really and truly transpire. Sometimes when going into an organization, they want it to happen within 2 months, or they want it to happen within 6 months. Your organization, based upon size and complexity, may require more than just 6 months in order to get the transformation taken care of.
How do you keep SAFe from becoming overly bureaucratic?
When everyone involved in the transformation in your agile, to keep it less complicated, everyone needs to understand what their role is, how to play their role. And if you're not sure, it's okay to raise your hand and ask someone for a level of assistance.
Okay, so it's funny you say that because you said that everyone needs to be able to play their role. Mm-hmm. What role should executives play in a successful agile transformation?
The best role that an executive can play in an agile transformation is to show that he or she is fully on board with the transformation. As a release train engineer, I would invite the executive to speak at the beginning of my PI planning. I did it intentionally because I needed everyone who was part of that agile release train to understand that they had buy-in from the top all the way to the bottom on the work in which we were getting ready to perform. When your teams realize that your leadership is on board with the work that they're getting ready to perform, and that executive walks in and gives encouraging words and talks about your previous performance and how well you've done, and maybe even call out a name or two, now you have an art that's going to perform at a better rate than if you did not have the executive come in. So an executive just basically letting everyone know that they're on board is extremely important.